a todos. Gracias a todos por haber venido a esta presentación del informe de la Agencia Internacional de la Energía Renovables 2020, Análisis y Forecast 2025. Esperemos que todos estéis bien y vamos a hacer este evento en inglés. Por tanto, I'm going to switch to English. It's a pleasure having all of you here. It's a pleasure having again this it could be the last event we are doing this year, and this is happy for us to be here. We are going to present this report from the agency, International Energy Agency. We have with us Heymi Bahar, a good friend of us, and as the same we did last year, we are going to comment about this forecast, comment about the Spanish energy by the Spanish Association of Energy. We have with us Lucía Dolera from APPA. We have with us Heikki Willstedt from IEA, and we have Donoso from UNEF. Well, it is a pleasure of having all of them here. We are going to start with this event in three parts. The first of all is going to be the presentation of this report by Heymi Bahar. The second one is this round table with these three people very well known in the Spanish market. And the third one could be this Q&A section we are going to have in this question. You can send your question to pablo.dejuan@enerclub.es, or you can do it in the preguntas y respuestas or in the chat. This is something you can do. You can do in English or in Spanish. It's the same. Well, this is the third report we have this year in renewables. Our friend Heymi came here in February to present the 2019 forecast, a 2019 report of renewable. After this, we saw him by TV, in June, in the 4th of June, in the middle of the pandemic, explaining us what the renewables have been doing through this pandemic. This in COVID has impacted all the sector, but renewables are very resilient and has increased 7% in the electricity market about all. Following this report, we can follow this 2025 news. They think that at the end of the 2025, the renewable production of electricity will be overcome the coal and overtake the coal in the future for this 2025. Well, we have a very interesting moment in Spain, and that's why the same as we did last year, these comments from the Spanish Association. We are forecasting auction for 26th of January. This is a good time for all the actors involved in this area, Heymi. And I'm going to present our good friend Heymi Bahar because he is now in charge of the renewable report. He's coming to Spain, whatever I ask him about that. But now we have him in this situation. He has a master's degree in Johns Hopkins. He joined the International Energy Agency. He's senior analyst in this renewable, and he knows very well all this market of renewables of things. Well, he's Spaniard, as I said several times, and I think, Mr. Heymi, it's a pleasure of having you here. I'll give you the floor, okay? Go ahead, please, Heymi.
Thank you very much, Arcadio, a good friend of mine at this point, been coming to and present. And my trip on the 28th of February to Madrid was my last one before everything started. So since then, I haven't traveled anything like anywhere for business. Until yesterday, I came to Istanbul to visit my family. Now I'm connecting from Istanbul. They are here. Thank you very much for the invitation again. And I would like to share my screen to show you some slides. Arcadio, please let me know if you see my screen.
Okay, we can see it.
Perfect. So, so I would like to start by explaining you a little bit what we have done as the IEA throughout the process of the pandemic. In February, I presented the report in Madrid. Then in March, we had the pandemic hitting all the world, including Europe, United States, and everywhere. And then we basically did a market update based on our 2019 forecast. We published this in end of May. I presented in June in an online event with the Spanish Energy Club the results. And since then, we have been updating the results. So I will be also referring to this May update that we did and how we updated this, the forecast. I would like to start with a view of the global energy demand. Obviously, global energy demand is hit in a way that has never seen in its entire history. It's a demand shock that stopped not only the economic production, but also travel. In that sense, we are seeing an important demand decline of 5%. This is actually 7 times more than we saw in the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. I mean, just to give you a scale of the situation. And different sectors are affected differently. All of them will decline, electricity, heat, and transport fuels, but the biggest hit is expected to come and to hit the transport fuels as a whole. We drive less, there's less economic activity, plus the aviation sector is the hit hardest. Number of flights have decreased by 80% on average over the last few months in some countries. So we are seeing an important decline in demand. We always say that renewables are resilient, but I'm almost going to say that some part of renewables are resilient and some parts are not. Obviously, as Arcadio mentioned, we expect renewable electricity to increase by 7% this year, a totally opposite direction of what we see in the global energy demand decline. And while they will increase, the reason is twofold. The first one is that in most of the countries, as also in Spain, renewables have long-term contracts, so they are not affected by the decline in demand or decline in prices. They are mostly dispatched as they are generating normally, while the other part of the energy system needs to reduce the output, such as coal, gas, and etc. On the other hand, the second reason is that we are adding more and more renewables, and also they have priority dispatch to the grid in many markets, including most of European Union markets. Even if they don't have priority dispatch rules, as you all know, they are in the merit order effect in the wholesale market, enters first into the market. We see a small decline in the heat in the buildings and industry. As we were at home mostly, most of the heating at home has increased over the last years during the lockdown periods, but industry saw a significant decline. So this basically ends up with a small decline on heat consumption in buildings and industrial processes. But as you can see, the biggest hit by far is from transport fuels. In this case, renewables output such as biofuels mostly declines actually more than the total energy demand decline in the transport sector. The reason is quite simple. Actually, in some markets, biofuels are hit by in a double shock. The demand decline, as we all know, they are mandated with the gasoline and diesel, so they naturally decline. But also, competitiveness of biofuels have been reduced significantly in markets where there's counts, such as Brazil, due to the low oil prices. In addition to that, some of the markets reduced their biofuel mandate, such as in Southeast Asia, thinking that the costs will be higher due to low oil prices. I'll come back to that in detail very soon. So we try to measure in this report the resilience of renewables in multiple ways. We came up with 6 or 7 indicators. I'm going to present 2 here. One related to the stock markets. We looked at about more than 100 big countries in the global different stock markets and created several indexes. Since the beginning of this year, the all energy sector performance in stock markets declined by 40%. Obviously, it's a big shock in March, as you see in the figure, but then the recovery was slow and almost non-existent. This is driven by obviously significant reduction of oil and gas performance due to low prices and demand decline. But on the other hand, wind and solar companies are significantly resilient compared to the oil energy sector. The reason is twofold. First of all, most of the companies in these wind and solar sector, you can name manufacturers, installers, renewable IPPs, and so on and so forth. They are more or less in a good financial health situation. Before the crisis, they've been in an important increasing trend anyways, but the crisis shows that the investors, on top of their financial health, they are seeing renewables as an increasing demand in the coming years or in the longer term. That's why we saw a significant investment flowing into renewable energy sector. Wind and solar stocks are all 1.5 to almost 2.5% times higher compared to the starting of the year. They broke all-time records during the crisis. So it gives you an indication. Obviously, this is not a single indicator. This doesn't mean that renewables are resilient on its own, but it shows a good sign. The other one we saw is the actual, so the market is there, but whether the governments are there to auction more renewables. And in this case, we saw a very important trend. Despite some countries decided to delay their auctions, none of them canceled any auctions. They just delayed them. But we saw in 2020, renewable countries auctioning a record level of solar and wind capacity. This is because they believe in their long-term targets, and the COVID-19 crisis did not stop them to auction more capacity. Actually, this was higher than last year, driven by China, India, and European countries. Talking about auctions, this year we looked at very detailed in our forecast what are the policies driving the growth of renewables. I presented in my previous presentation with Spanish Club over the last few years, competitive versus administrative, whether it's a feed-in tariff or an auction. This year we went much more in detail in analyzing this, and we realized that obviously competitively set mechanisms lead the growth, and auctions take a big part of it, as Spanish auction will come very soon. But I would like to highlight for the first time a smaller part of this. This is the corporate PPAs, merchant plants, and contracts with multiple remuneration schemes, such as combination of auctions, merchant tail, corporate PPAs, and so on and so forth. We see this market, an incredible market going forward. Why? Because many countries are reducing their contract periods of auctions, reducing the remuneration schemes, and countries and companies will like to explore more options in the lifetime of the project. In that sense, we saw an important increase of projects that will come online, about 15% in the next 5 years, will come from this kind of market-driven forces, or beyond common policy schemes, as we call, because these are different than government auctions. This is an important message here. This means that the maturity of wind and solar technologies are increasing quite rapidly, and companies are willing to take additional risks in the lifetime of the contract. And this is good also for market integration if there is some support along with it. Looking at the forecast, 2019 in terms of the new capacity additions was a record year, which was a very good development. It was a double-digit growth compared to 2018. When we did the forecast, when I presented you in June, we were expecting about 10% decline in capacity additions in 2020. This was in the middle of the pandemic, where there were significant supply chain issues, logistical challenges, and a significant slowdown in construction activity. But what we did since May, we looked at the details of this picking up construction activity month by month, in some cases week by week. And then we realized that the renewables adapted very fast to this new normal conditions of the COVID-19. And now we updated our forecast and we revised it up by almost 20%. And now we are expecting an increase in 2020 in capacity additions. This is another indicator that shows that renewables will, not only renewable generation will grow, but also new additions will grow in 2020. We expect then an important rebound in 2021. The reason behind this is twofold. First of all, the projects that are basically being delayed in some markets, or some policies creating flexibility for the developers to commission later than 2020 will come online. But also, as I showed in my auction schedule, that countries continue to actually contract new projects, especially offshore wind, for instance, during the pandemic. So this shows an important upside in the coming years. And actually policies drive the growth rather than the COVID. In our forecast, in 2020, we expect a huge jump in China and the United States due to the policy deadlines that are coming up. In 2021, the picture is different. Most of the European Union and India growth is driving, but also many markets, all these delayed projects in other countries, we expect to come online. And just to give you an indication, the growth of capacity additions in 2021 globally will be actually fastest since 2015, just to give you an indicator. Obviously, solar PV accounts for more than 60% of renewables growth in our forecast. This is the largest by far, the technology that will drive the growth for many reasons, including the distributed PV part, which is 40% of the growth. But we expect an important upside of 120 gigawatts in 2021 and higher increase in 2022. But I would like to highlight 2022 as a policy uncertainty here, especially in China and also in other countries such as in the European Union. There are many markets who are just announcing their auction schedules, whether they will be able to contract or not. But we looked at those new schedules and more ambitious plans, and we believe that in 2022, renewable solar PV additions could reach almost 150 gigawatts if, as I mentioned, some of the uncertainties are tackled and there is additional support for rooftop PV and financial costs are lower. I would like to show this black line here, which is an important one that is hit by the crisis. This is the rooftop PV sector. Obviously, the investors of this segment is different than utility scale investors. It's not Iberdrola, it's not Repsol, it's not these huge utilities or Neon. These are not these kind of big energy companies that are basically looking into this market. These are mostly individuals or small and medium-sized enterprises which are this crisis, and they will prioritize their investment. As a result, we expect, compared to the past, to about 30% with a slight pickup in 2022. I would like to give you a close look at the European picture. In 2022, why I'm showing this, because Spain plays an important role here. In 2020, we expect European Union capacity additions to decline compared to 2019. But we need to talk about 2019 before entering into 2020, because 2019 was an abnormal year for the European Union standards, particularly because of Spain growth. Spain had a big jump in 2019, both PV and wind, due to the basically out of corporate PPA projects, plus the auctions of wind that came online, gave a big boost in the European market. We expect a decline because of Spanish market slightly going down, going towards a normalization period. But in terms of the future growth, we expect a particularly increasing additions in the European Union for two reasons. The first one is clear 2030 targets and clear long-term net zero targets. This means a good signal for investors that European Union will go towards that target. In addition to that, we observed that many markets took these 2030 targets and and so on and so forth. So that's why we reflected into our forecast. In the next 5 years, from 2020 to 2020, especially distributed PV sector, commercial, mostly large-scale rooftop sector will lead the growth, followed by France. France is entering into the market fast because they are behind their European Union targets. They need to accelerate. On the other hand, Spain is compared to last 3 years when the Spanish market was zero almost in terms of the growth. This is a big jump from Spain. We expect most of the growth to come from solar PV. Still, distributed PV sector in Spain struggles. It's not really picking up very fast in our forecast compared to other European Union countries. There's a lot of large-scale utility projects in Spain that will come online. There are a lot of plans for really large-scale projects, so we expect those mostly to come online, both wind and solar PV. And obviously the new auctions and the capacities around new auctions are in line with our forecast. The biggest uncertainty in Spain and also rest of the Europe, which shows in our accelerated case, whether on top of the auction schemes, the companies or the countries will go more on corporate PPAs and merchant projects. Spain showed that this was possible in normal economic times. We will see whether this will still be continuing in the coming years to come, basically on top of the auction schemes. We expect in the main case, the developers will move towards the auction schemes rather than taking more risks with corporate PPAs, and corporate PPAs will take a smaller share going forward. All this global growth will take us to a place where it is a major shift in the electricity market. We expect in 2025, as Arcadio mentioned, renewables to account for largest share of global power system, surpassing coal. And in terms of total capacity, wind and solar PV combined will pass natural gas in 2024 and coal in natural gas in 2023, coal in 2024. And hydropower remains really the hidden part of the renewables, which accounts for the largest share of renewable generation. But obviously, wind and solar PV generation will double or triple in the next 5 years. Many of you asked in the previous presentations that I had about the curtailment and how the integration is happening. And with the COVID-19 demand decline situation, raised the question marks in many places, whether the system operators are curtailing more electricity, whether we can integrate those and so on and so forth. We decided to look at for the first time the historical performance of TSOs. And we realized that there has been a significant improvement of the curtailment, both shares and absolute terms in many markets. And in most markets, the share of curtailment of wind and solar remains below 3 and 2%, including Spain, one of the good performant countries in terms of the integration. So system operators are really adapting to this new normal of VRE penetration increase. Of course, there's more to be done, but we already saw since 2015 an incredible improvement. I also put this slide in for the first time we did this analysis looking at oil company by oil company. There is Repsol here. That's why I wanted to present this in this session. We see an important oil and gas companies entering into the renewables market, especially wind and solar. I'd like to highlight two important points. The first one, yes, they will install or contract. This picture includes all of these, which means their own investments in terms of capacity, their shares in the companies that install for them, plus their PPA contracts with renewable developers. It will grow by almost 8-fold or 10-fold in the coming years. And this is the first one, incredible increase. But their share in the overall renewable capacity growth market will remain less than almost 2%. So yes, their investment will increase, but in terms of what they will represent, still much higher than before. But in terms of overall picture, we do not expect oil and gas majors to become the largest investors of renewables. It will go by tenfold, but will be the largest. And important point here, as you can see from the companies, all European. Why? It's very simple. It's about the policies. European Union announces a significant net zero target, and most of the European companies are introducing policies to reduce their emissions based on these long-term targets. Here, 95% will come from the European markets. I would like to highlight a few important points here as well. One is on biofuels. Biofuels is the most hit sector. There will be an incredible historical decline in the production of biofuels globally, hit by both ethanol and biodiesel, although HVO production will increase because it's a new market that is growing. I would like to highlight a big uncertainty in 2021. We saw a little rebound in our forecast. However, if we did this forecast before, probably even after 2 months we froze the numbers, we will be much more cautious than what I show you here, because we see that the demand recovery in the transport sector is slower than expected. IEA, since we did use the demand numbers in September, reduced its forecast on oil demand in October consecutively. So we need to revise these numbers down probably. And in 2025, we expect a rebound of the growth with the transport demand, but this growth is significantly lower than what we used to expect in our last year forecast, because we expect many countries to abandon most of the higher blending rates that they announced they will do so far because of the increasing cost situation. When we look at the heat, I think it's important to highlight, you see a big contrast here between the residential sector and the industrial sector in 2020. We expect a historical decline in the industrial use of bioenergy. As you can see here, it's hit hardest because it's used mostly in the ethanol sector, producing electricity from the residues, especially in Brazil and in several other parts of Latin America. Also, paper and pulp industry and food industry was hit by the crisis with the closure of the restaurants. And we saw the bioenergy declining significantly. On the other hand, you see an opposite picture of renewables, especially driven by renewable electricity. As the share of renewables increase, their use of heating and electricity also increases, actually the biggest performer in 2020. Over the longer term, we expect both industrial and buildings renewable heat consumption to increase by about 20%. However, the share of renewables in the heating sector only increases from 11 to 12% in the next 5 years. This is significantly lower than what we need to go in terms of the long-term targets, and only will result in 2% decline in CO2 emissions, which is significantly low compared to the picture. As everybody is talking about EU stimulus or the other stimulus government packages, we looked at every single country's stimulus packages one by one, and then we gathered them. We divided them into different categories of clean energy. As you can see, infrastructure, transport, and efficiency sector basically gets the lion's share of the government stimulus packages, followed by other clean energy, which mostly includes batteries and green hydrogen, followed by renewable electricity. But when you look at actually the next generation EU proposal, EU alone more than doubles, almost triples the all government stimulus packages that is announced. Obviously, the use of this spending is still a question mark, but still it reflects mostly on infrastructure, transport, and efficiency, which is actually, according to us, a good development. The reason behind this is simple, because these are the sectors that I presented in my previous slides, the most difficult to decarbonize in terms of this. I would like to finish my presentation with one important sector, which is the one airlines that are hit hardest. Obviously, the airlines bailouts are totally justified in terms of saving these companies from this crazy year of decline in transport demand. This decline is unforeseen in the global history. That's why it is normal, but we looked at one by one in 30 airlines bailouts, whether they include any environmental conditions, let alone sustainable aviation fuels. We only saw that only 4 were subject to, in quotation, environmental conditions or green conditions, with only 2 requiring sustainable aviation fuels blending. If all these bailouts included a 2% requirement of the blending in the coming years, we will have expected a 50 times more market, which will lead into probably significant cost reduction and so on and so forth. So I would like to thank you for this time and my presentation, and I would like to open it to questions and comments from my other colleagues from the Spanish energy market. I would like to highlight one important point. There is a data visualization tool for the first time we basically put. We are going to circulate this presentation, and we allow companies to buy the full data set with a purchase. It's a full data set of every single forecast with all technologies, biofuels, heat, and electricity. You can actually purchase it, and I will give it back to Arcadio. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Heymi. It's a pleasure, as always, of having you here. It's a pleasure for all the Spanish. You describe a very bright future for electro renewables. Very expecting. We're very expecting now hear about this. Now we are going to see what happened. What is the point of view of our colleagues here in Spain? Okay, and after this we will go back to a Q&A session and the question they are asking to you. Okay, thank you very much for, as always. Now we are going to give the floor to our 3 guests here, very well known, all of them. I think they are going to appear in our screen from now on. We have with us Lucía Dolera, Director of Studies of APPA Renovables. Before I pronounce her name, but I change it this way. We have Heikki Willstedt. Heikki, I can't see you, but I can see Pepe Donoso, José Donoso, Director General in UNEF, Spanish Association of PV. And the question for these 15 minutes we have for all of you, this is, you can comment about this report in electricity renewals, or whatever you want about this, how can we provide a system of providing renewals now in the future, or we can speak about the market in Spain about renewables. No? Now we are forecasting this auction after 2 or 3 years without auctions here in Spain. And we will start, we will the floor Lucía Dolera the first time. Lucía, the floor is yours, no? For 3, 4, 5 minutes. Okay. 4, it's in the middle.
First of all, thank you, Arcadio, for inviting APPA Renovables to this interesting and challenging workshop. It has been a pleasure to hear Heymi talking about the Renewable Market Update report. And well, I'm going to give you several ideas of which is our vision of the renewable market in the current context. And well, as you may all know, I'm Lucía Dolera from APPA Renovables. APPA Renovables is the Renewable Energies Companies Association. We are working for the interest of our associated for more than 33 years, and we gather all the renewable technology. So once said this, I'm going to show you the main ideas that we want to give you to all of you, and we will be afterwards open to any question that may arise. So as we all know, in the renewable sector in Spain, we have had good things and not such a good things, and we have to learn from those that were not so good and go ahead for those ones that are helping us. And well, and I also want to share with you that Spain now is in the top 10 in the RECAI index. This index is a study done for the consultancy Ernst & Young regarding the most attractive markets in renewables. So I think we are now in a good way to say that good things are are now been doing in Spain. No? So regarding options, that I think is now the very, very latest good news that we have, you may all know that last Saturday, we had the first call that came into force for this new decade of new potential to be installed. So 3 gigawatts of new power will be installed in the for this first call. So one thing that I would like to point out is that there are specific technologies that are asking for technologically neutral options. And we would like to point out that we don't have to forget that there are technologies that have reached their competitiveness due to that this wasn't the policy used in the beginning of the sector, of the starting as technology, renewable technology. So they would have never reached their competitiveness if the technologically neutral options or whatever would have been set. So if we have to take into account that we don't have to look just at the prices, because if we just focus in the prices, only PV installation will be installed in the south of Spain. So we have to look for the potential and the complementarity of all the technologies to take the advantage of each technology potential. So I think this is very, very important for APPA, because all the renewable technologies are necessary and complementary between them. So and we have to go on this idea and to bet for a consolidated sector, as now it seems that we are on the right way, that creates, well, if we follow this path, I think is important, because renewable technologies creates employment, a very good a high level employment, and local and national industry. That is also very, very important for this development. And only two more points and I finished. I will also like to take into account that we always talk about electric renewable energies, and only 22.2% of the consumption is electricity. So this is very important, and we have to take into account. So which is the challenge? The challenge is to electrify those consumptions or replace them, but not non-electric renewables. So I think this is a very important challenge that we have. And as one of the last ideas I want to share with you from APPA is that for the next decade, we have to integrate in the electric system a huge amount of renewable energy power. So this has to be followed by an increase of the demand and or an exit of power from the system, electric system. So as we all know, more than 3 gigawatts of coal are now out of the system, but however, more than 5 gigawatts has to be included in the system in the following years, every year, up to 2030. So we are worried about how to deal with this and do it well in a safety way. So we are worried about the accumulation of renewable energy in the sense of having the possibility of discharge the electricity generated, renewable energy generated, and not being able to use it. Here we have a good potential with the storage systems, but this is a thing that we have, an issue that we have to take into account and to solve, and the cannibalization of the prices in the market prices. So the objectives for 2030 are very ambitious, and we have now less than a decade to change our energetic model in a very challenging way, where the renewable energies have
Lucia,
a leading role.
Please. Finish. Okay, thank you very much, Lucia. You are showing the best interest for renewables here and all the renewables, no? And now we are going to give the floor to Heikki Willstedt. He is the Director of Energy Policy and Climate Change and in the Spanish Wind Association. Maybe you can comment about the wind association, the wind farms. You can go in offshore and offshore, and maybe the report of the Heymi.
Okay,
Yours,
Arcadio, great pleasure to be with you and with all the participants in this webinar. We're very happy to be with all of you and share some thoughts, some ideas on where the Spanish market is going after, and especially after hearing what Heymi was saying. It's always a pleasure to listen to the presentations of the International Energy Agency. They are very clarifying. They give exactly what directions we are going, right? So having said that, it is for us, it is very important to understand three issues. Where do we come from, where we are now, and where we want to go in the wind power sector. To be very brief, where do we come from? Spain was one of the pioneers in wind power until 2012. We installed 23 gigawatts of wind power in a period of less than 15 years. And that made Spain one of the three countries that actually are net exporters of this technology. This is very important, and it has to be taken into consideration, especially from a strategical point of view for a country like Spain that hasn't got many industries, technological industries like wind power. About the past, also important to say that after 2012 or 2013, there was hiatus. There were no installations until basically until 2018, where there were some installations in the Canary Islands. As you probably have heard, there were some auctions in 2016 and 17, and in 2019 there was this, as Heymi was explaining in his presentation. This was the huge activity in both in the wind and in PV sector, and now in 2020 we are still installing parts of the installations of 2017, of the auction of 2017. This is important to understand that when Heymi was saying what about PPAs and auctions, if you have announced auctions, and especially with a pay-as-bid system, there are a lot of people that might have been thinking, promoters, that might have been thinking of doing PPAs, but they will first wait to see how the auctions pan out. And in that sense, they can, after first auction, they might compare what they get from the auction and what they get from the PPAs. And the same thing goes with the purchaser of PPAs. They might be a little bit reluctant to go into a PPA, but at the moment, everybody was waiting to see whether it was possible to change the legislation in order to have a design for auctions that is similar to the rest of Europe. And that is a great accomplishment that the government did. Of course, as a sector, we would have liked it to be faster, maybe in 1 year faster, but we have this new system, and we are happy to have the auctions. We have a schedule, so we are very well set now to a new renaissance of renewable power in Spain. We have a lot of resources, both wind and both solar, and also biomass, and also some hydro. And we can, with all that, we can do a lot of things. And we have the companies, and we have this, especially important is that we have the infrastructure. We have very good infrastructure, one of the most modern power lines, power infrastructure in Europe. It's all 10 years old or a little bit more. So in that sense, we can integrate all these new renewables until 2025. There's no problem, more or less. The investments will be in infrastructure will be moderate. Those that are needed. So we are in a very good position currently. Now, for the future, it is very important that the auctions give the right signals to investors, and it becomes not a vicious circle, the opposite. It has to become a virtuous circle where the auctions go well, and so the investors see that the Spanish market is going well, and that position that Lucia was saying that we have in the top 10 of investment of attractiveness in investment for renewables becomes stabilized, and so we can, in that sense, it will be much easier to achieve the very ambitious target that Spain has for renewables in 2030 to achieve 74% of electricity coming from renewables. That is absolutely doable if I said, we establish this virtuous circle of installations, auctions, investment, and so on and so on. So but that's my first input to the debate.
Thank you very much, Heikki. It was very clear. We are set in the stage for this new future, and we will see what happens. Now, the last but not the least, we have UNEF, Donoso. This is a big association of PV. Maybe you can comment on this situation in Spain, or you can comment about this fund, the next generation fund that Ms. Heymi put there to participate a big chunk of in the renewables.
Okay, I will try to comment both in 5 minutes. Thank you, Arcadio. Thank you to invite to me to participate in this webinar. Thank you to the IEA for his report. I must say that traditionally IEA reports are too conservative in relation to our technology, and we believe that in this time our forecast, international forecasts of our sector in PV are slightly better than but some better, and I will think it will be better than the forecast of IEA. But in this case, the difference is small, not as in the past. In relation to the situation in Spain, I think I think we have a very important year this year, because our sector showed its resilience to a big crisis as is this one of the COVID, in both areas, in utility scale and in rooftop. In utility scale, I think this year is very important, because for first time, and I think it's, we connected to the grid already, we are connected to the grid 1,516 megawatts of projects outside of any governmental program, are only PPAs or merchant, that show our degree of competitiveness. We consider that we can finish the year with more or less 2 gigawatts of that. That does not mean that we don't need options. I think they are complementaries. It depends on the strategy of every company, but particularly option will give stability to our industrial sector. In this moment in Spain, 60,000 people live from our sector, and then it's important, this stability. In fact, okay, some words about self-consumption before. We were concerned in the first moment of the COVID crisis about self-consumption, but now we are optimistic. We see the final figures at the end of the year, but we consider that we can finish the year as minimum with the same amount as the last year, but maybe even we'll improve the figures of the last year in self-consumption. That we consider that our cruising speed of 600 megawatts of self-consumption every year will be, if no, we'll achieve this year, will be close. But in the next year, we'll establish this cruising speed of 600 megawatts every year in the regulatory condition that we have now. If this condition improve, we can improve the speed. In relation to the next generation, we are presenting one proposal to the government at this respect. But we wanted to use these funds, particularly not for commercial projects, if not to promote innovation. We are presenting one proposal of 30 programs and 35 administrative reforms to the government, focused into strengthen our industrial sector. We need to, that our sector, industrial sector in Spain, need to earn power, earn volume. We need to promote the clusters, industrial clusters. We need to promote the merge of Spanish companies between them. They are leaders at international level, but the leaders need to continue working always. And two, working in R&D excellence centers. We need to be our idea is that Spain become an international photovoltaic PV that Spain will become a hub of PV technology. And for that, we need a center of excellence. We need to be able to capture international high-level people of technology that come to Spain, that come to work for Spanish companies, that come to work in R&D center of excellence. And then this is one of our lines of work. And the other line in relation with this fund is training. we need to change is the formation and training. We need to change the curricula in the universities. We need to change the curricula in professional training course in the way that we have in a new paradigm, and I have no sense that the core learning in the universities will be for technologies that not will be majoritaries in the future. And then the people need to learn the technologies that are in the new paradigms, wind or PV, in course of specialization. We need to change that as soon as possible. And in these three lines, industrialization, R&D, and education are our priorities for these funds. I don't hear you, Arcadio.
I'll ask is about the next generation of the relationship with the new deployment of renewables. As you said, the government said that the auction are complementary. You know, they said twice or three times I heard about this. Well, now we're going to jump to the Q&A session for all of you. And Heymi, are you here, Heymi?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Maybe Pablo de Juan has several questions. I saw that in the questions, but there are more in this. Maybe Pablo, you can translate to the people or the Spanish or Heymi or whatever.
Okay, thanks, Arcadio. Heymi, we have a lot of questions for you, and for the rest, for Heikki, Jose, and Lucía, they're asking you.
You are the star. You are the star, Heymi, here.
Yeah, as always. And Heikki, Jose, and Lucía, we will ask you about the auction after the questions to Heymi. Heymi, a couple of questions on offshore outlook and the decreasing cost. Have you taken that into account? They're asking you if in your forecast for the European Union, you're including the UK, and when will it become market competitive? So that's only for offshore.
Yeah, thank you very much. So for the offshore wind outlook, we expect actually the capacity additions to increase from about 6 gigawatts today globally to 14 gigawatts in 2025. So this is the annual, basically, capacity additions. However, an important shift in the market. First of all, Asian markets are taking the lead instead of the European Union towards the end of the forecast period, and United States becomes actually the second largest annual market in our forecast in 2024-2025. So that's an important shift. The second trend that I would like to highlight, the share of offshore wind in overall wind additions increases to 20% in 2025 in our forecast. So which means an important jump from about 8% today. So that's the key market. Our Europe picture that I showed includes UK. It also includes Turkey, because our Europe region includes UK, Turkey, European Union, and few other smaller countries in the aggregate. But those who are interested can look at the data visualization tool for just EU numbers. It's all there with all the detail. And the cost declines. Europe will continue to be the lowest cost of offshore wind in 2025, actually. So China is still slow in terms of cost reduction, and US is just starting. Despite being the largest market, the cost will remain higher than Europe, but we expect European Union offshore wind tenders to result actually about 45 to 55, 60 euros range for offshore wind in the coming years, with contracts ranging 15 to 20 years.
Okay, thanks, Heymi. Another question on forecast. You showed the graph of the forecast for until 2022, and then you showed a forecast for Europe until 2025. What will happen globally from 22 to 25? Will it continue growing or not?
Very good question. So for PV, there's a continuous growth towards 2025. And for wind, it's up and down. Why up and down? Because wind markets are different than, I mean, historically has been up and down for the wind market. It's not something new. It is very policy dependent. Why it's not a constant increase? It's not about money anymore. I mean, it's not about subsidies. It's not about policies. It's about other factors for wind. This is the social acceptance, permitting, all these other factors. Because in some markets, what we observe that wind is actually cheaper than solar, but still investors install solar instead of wind because they simply don't want to deal with all these very long permitting structure or investment barriers or social acceptance issues, also banks. So actually for specifically in the European Union, we suggested to the European Commission that instead of talking about what kind of policies and competition, regulation, and all this stuff, we need to think about the schemes that will involve the social acceptance issues to be resolved in a faster way. And this will become a major barrier, in our opinion, to wind deployment. It's not about price. It's not about technology. It's not about contracts. It's nothing about anything related numeric anymore for wind. It's all about non-numeric barriers, I will say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Heymi. A question about the market. They're asking you if you have seen any, say, irregular behavior in market prices in those countries with a big amount of new installed capacity, thanks to auctions, basically.
So, so there are key markets that achieved really low cost. For instance, everybody is talking about Portugal, which had I think 17 euro or 13 euro. We need to be a little bit careful about how we interpret these prices. These prices does not reflect the full remuneration of the project. So that's the irregularity. And we say to the countries mostly, I think Lucia also mentioned, pushing the prices down does not necessarily mean always a good thing. Let me give you an example. In India, many investors pushed the prices down significantly, but we saw many cancellations of these projects, or utilities wants to renegotiate the contract prices because the developers cannot get the financing to install them. So it's really an interesting trend. We see that's irregularity. And another irregularity that we see is in the Middle East countries, especially the Gulf countries, where you see very low prices. But this is also not a reflection of the market conditions, because there is almost zero cost financing that is provided by the government in these markets. So actually the money is almost for free.
Okay, thank you, Heymi. They're asking you also, what are the drivers in the acceleration of India, of new renewable installed capacity? What are the main reasons for this? How are they doing it?
Well, India changed the strategy a little bit after all these delays and failures of contract negotiations. They did two things. The first one, they introduced hybrid auctions, which means wind plus solar plus storage. As you know, the grid is a big problem in India. So that's why they created this actually very good innovative auction design on hybrid auctions. And these hybrid auctions, people can combine hydro, wind, and solar and storage together. That's the one thing that they did. The second thing that they did was also quite interesting. They auctioned a manufacturing capacity connected with the deployment, which means that they required that auction to have at the same time a capacity that is to be installed for the manufacturing of the panels.
This is combined, Heymi, combined the manufacturing, the auction.
Exactly, this is combined. Obviously, in the World Trade Organization issues in Europe, this will be quite difficult if it's not designed well, as you know very well. But there's another country who did that 3 years ago, actually Turkey, who required the bidders for a 1 gigawatt wind project, a single project, to install a manufacturing plant for the 70% of the wind turbine structure. So, I mean, these things exist, but it's an important driver for India, actually. Yeah.
Thanks. One last question, Heymi. How do you see the future of solar thermal? What's your outlook on that?
Well, solar thermal is hit by solar PV prices actually in the world. Many countries announced over the past 5 years, 6 years or 7 years, very large solar thermal power generation projects with 8 to 15 hours of storage, which is good actually for the market because we need the storage. But what happened over the last 6 years, PV costs declined by 80%, and companies or developers are starting to either cut some of the capacity of solar thermal, combine it with PV, or abandon the project entirely, as they don't want to deal with the project complexity. There is no remuneration for storage. That's why they don't want to spend so much money on that, and so on and so forth. So we do not see a very vibrant market for CSP, but we expect 3 markets to be largest: is Chile, Morocco, and some projects in South Africa, and that's it. In none of the markets, US market is completely gone, Spanish market, former big glorious market, gone, and Chile is slow, and that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Heymi. So Lucía, Heikki, maybe you wanna, well, Heikki, you already talked a bit about the auctions, and they're asking you actually, how do you see the future of offshore here in Spain? So maybe, well, you can speak about whatever you want.
Well, it looks bright, I must say, after many years of doubting a little bit whether to go for the sea. It looks very good. I mean, we have companies, they already have Spanish companies that already have experience in the world seas installing offshore, that they're starting to look at the Spanish market, especially around the Canary Islands. And there we are going to have, we have already projects that are starting to be processed in order to get the permits. So we have several hundreds of megawatts of floating offshore in the Canary Islands that are starting their process. But we think that it is possible to have some already functioning projects by 2025 in the best of cases. And after the second part of the decade, we'll see more and more projects, because the technology currently of floating offshore for Spain, it's the future. I mean, it's the new future. I mean, the onshore, we have a lot of potential, and we want to install 10 gigawatts from here to 2025. That's the objective of the sector. And we think we can do it, and we can also not only do 10 new gigawatts, we want to also do repowering of 5 gigawatts of old installations. They have 2,300 hours, 2,500 hours of full load, and we think that we can go with and these are all installations in the best places, so we can go to 3,500, 3,700 full load hours with the new machines. So plenty of energy, plenty of ambition in the wind power sector, and we know that the offshore is going definitely to be the next challenge we have to face, but we are going to overcome it.
Okay, thanks very much, Heikki. And Lucía, we can end with you. What's your view on this auction, the one that's been just announced for the January next year?
Well, I think we all were expecting this auction, and even knowing the past that we had before regarding the government, we were expecting that they complete with their word to have this first call ready at the end of the year. So really for the sector, is a very, very good news. To have this first call gives a lot of good positive that for at the national level and for the international level. So it's important, this stability, that this first auction, and with the following years we will have, as it is planned, another one. And so I think it's really, really good news, and gives a lot of positive and stability, and it is really challenging, and well, for us it's important that to have an amount of power to install for certain technologies, but do not forget the other ones that are not concrete. Put 1 gigawatt for wind, 1 gigawatt for PV, and the rest. So it's important to take into account small installations. Well, and I think really is the beginning of a very positive future, and what my colleagues have said, gives everything stability and gives everything that we need as an indicator for Spain and for the rest of the country. So it's really, really good.
Thank you, Lucia. Okay, Arcadio, we're done here. If you want to wrap it up.
Let me put a small question from my part to Heymi. What do you expect from this floating technology in your forecast in the near future? Because this is going to be very interesting for Spain, as you know.
Yeah, so thanks, Arcadio. So already offshore wind at a large scale is installed in the UK, in Scotland. So it is starting to be really a player in the market. And not only Spain, but everybody in Latin America and Asia is looking into all floating because it's the same structure. And right now, I think it's just 2 or 3% of the market, offshore, floating offshore, or maybe 5% maximum. But I think we will see the share of floating PV to reach within the offshore wind probably 15 to 20% in the next 5 years, because it's in some European markets, even going to that deep is becoming costly slowly. And obviously in North Sea, there is some space, but even in France, French coast is not really shallow. I mean, you need to really work on that. So I think it's coming very soon, floating, and hopefully it will be cheaper. But I agree with Heikki that floating currently cannot compete in the auction scheme. I mean, this is too expensive, obviously. Whether I question there will be a separate kind of an auction scheme for floating demonstration projects, which France did, by the way, a separate auction, small, just to start up the market. And we know that this works well with the experience. So why not? Maybe it's a possibility in the future as an innovation auction.
Okay, thank you very much, Heymi. Would you like to add some more or something more, or it's okay? Okay, thank you very much, Heymi. Thank you very much, Heikki, Pepe, who left now. Thank you very much, Lucia, for your participation in this. Maybe it will be the last this year for us. And Merry Christmas and happy, I hope, a new year for all of you. Okay, for all of you, all the people who are in this webinar, all of the friends of the club. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you so much.
Nos vemos el próximo.
Merry Christmas.